I'm going to tell you something. If you two never bother me again in the rest of my life, I ain't giving up that stuff. I can't. There's good friends of mine out of the fucking state. Well, he could vote, you have to do it first.
That's why I said to you before, you don't understand. Cosanostra means that the boss is your boss. Understand?
I'm not the move for toys or games or kidding, right? I'm not the move for plans, I'm not the move for games, I'm not the move for none of that stuff there. This is going to be a cosanostra till I die. Be an hour from now, be it tonight, or 100 years from now, I'm in jail. You're going to be a cosanostra.
You ain't supposed to be alive. Because I was making an example out of you for any motherfucker that planted on me again. You understand? So the only reason you're still alive, don't think because we stopped. It was because that woman walked in the door. Then you would have been gone. You weren't supposed to walk away no more. You me, and that was the worst thing you ever did.
All right, and welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We are going to get into the rat segment of the show. And this is a segment where we basically unveil some paperwork and stuff like that. Now, this is a bit long-winded today, so there is a stretch of probably legitimately 4 or 5 pages of government paperwork that I'll probably put out on our Facebook page today. That way you can look at it yourself rather than read through 4 pages, because that's just going to take up a lot more time. We're going to go ahead and jump right into it. But like I said, check over on our Facebook page today or our YouTube community page, and you will see something basically that looks like this. As you can see on the screen, if you are watching this, it says PGT-1, a member source who was initiated in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, has advised that the Pittsburgh Borgata of La Cosa Nostra was organized in 1905. This is actual paperwork from the boss of San Francisco. And one of the things that I often get asked on this show is, why did California never succeed? And I think we know the reason now. I mean, granted, there's a lot of different politics. They weren't as strong as East Coast families. They didn't seize the ports and stuff like that. But I think now we have a better understanding because really you had a boss in San Francisco that was telling on everybody. Louis Fratto, same kind of thing. Today we're going to talk about Anthony Lima, but Louis Fratto was exactly the same way. Butch Blassie. A lot of people don't know. Butch Blassie was Giancana's number 2. His driver was involved in a lot of hits. He was an informant too. So the informant list, the more and more you dive into it, sort of begins to look really bad. Really, really, really bad. So today we're going to talk about San Francisco mob boss Anthony Lima, who literally gives up everybody. And he doesn't do it until after he gets shelved. And that's what's interesting, is he waits until after he's persona non grata, much like Joe Bonanno and Bill Bonanno, and they start just basically ratting on everybody. So we talk on this show all the time about how informants can truly destroy a family. One of the bigger questions I get asked of me all the time, and I just mentioned that, was why California families couldn't weather the storm. And always sort of on the back end, I thought that there was a bigger reason. But it was speculation pretty much until this week. I didn't really have information until this week about this, but because of informants, and massive ones at that. In both San Jose and San Francisco, both areas had big informants giving up information from almost day one. While you may not know some of the people that we are going to talk about today, you can look it up for yourself. But it sort of clues us in on the fact that they limited California just by talking. So the San Francisco Mafia has been around since the late 1920s, and it was established by Francesco Lanza. And they came in right around the time of Prohibition. And were a relatively small family with under 40 members. There were turf wars and many murders in those early days, especially over bootlegging and other things. Eventually, Lanza would become the first recognized, boss of California, or San Francisco. Lanza essentially takes over after the murder of Luigi Malvise, and he begins to move into drugs, into bootlegging, shakedowns, loan sharking, and more. Every mob racket that a guy could feasibly sort of involve himself in, he does. The Lanza family would become the most powerful family in Northern California. Lanza would die in 1937, and Anthony Lima would then take over. And Lima was not a California guy. He was actually born in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and he came from a family that was steeped in organized crime, and his uncles and his cousins were made guys within the Pittsburgh mob. His roots also connected him to made guys back in Sicily. In 1928, he ends up getting charged with murder in Pittsburgh. He ends up getting acquitted and immediately takes off to San Francisco. And along with him are his cousins and his uncles. Within a few months, he's deeply connected within Cosa Nostra in California and goes on the record with the San Francisco crime family. Lima quickly makes his mark, not just as a proficient killer, but somebody who exceeds intelligence in the underworld as far as business goes. And he specialized in three specific things: murder, fraud, and extortion. From Stockton to Lodi, he controlled everything. He would take his gains and he would legitimize them into a fruit farm and an olive oil business, much like we've seen other guys in the mob do, Joe Profaci to just name a couple, well, and Joe Bonanno too. He would take over, like I said, in about 1937. For the next 16 years, he ruled with an iron fist. In 1953, he takes a pinch for theft, and while he's in prison, he's demoted in favor of his friend and business partner, Michael Abadi. His demotion in rank infuriated him to absolutely no end. He would be released from prison, but really becomes persona non grata, and it infuriated him to the point where he decided to start talking to the feds. So this guy went from being a boss, taking a pinch, going away, and while he's gone, they're elevating his business partner to the boss and basically making him nobody. So he waits, and in 1965, many years after he was boss and then demoted, Anthony Lima begins to give information to the feds. He could give the feds an inside peek at organized crime, its functions, its hierarchies, and more. Lima would go on to detail making ceremonies and would give a complete history, much like Harry Riccobene of the Mafia in Pittsburgh, from inception to the current leadership. And he also put names to faces and ranks regarding other crime families, which seems to be the way the FBI was operating at the time. Corroborating information is basically what it comes down to. Lima would be known as SF 2689, and according to a memo that I have dated in October of 67, it stated that informant SF 2689 was former boss of the San Francisco Mafia. Lima would explain that he was inducted into the Pittsburgh mob in 1927, which was established in 1905. He explained that prior to that, in America, the Black Hand was already in this country, which predated the Mafia. He explained the Black Hand was comprised of Calabrians, and that they formed an alliance with the Camorra from Naples, and that all three groups had merged with the Sicilian mob. He would give full detailed information on induction ceremonies, like we said, from the pinprick on the finger to the rules a mobster was to follow. And he would explain, and these are quotes directly from the paperwork, "Honor is stress is the most sacred thing in our world. To destroy another person must be for honor and not money alone. A member is warned never to engage in an affair with the wives of other women. With the wives of other women, with the wives of other members. A member must never engage in white slavery or narcotics, both crimes which are degrading to the name of the organization. A member must obey the complaints and instructions of his superior and is never to take the life of a fellow member before presenting his grievance to the commission. A member must do nothing which would affect the organization without first receiving permission from his superior." All right. So Lima would then go on to give details about the Pittsburgh boss, who we know as John LaRocca. He would explain that LaRocca was the boss of Pittsburgh. He would tell the agents that he and LaRocca used to be close associates, and that he took over Pittsburgh in the mid to late 1940s. He explained that LaRocca sort of retired and that Michael Genovese had fully controlled and basically taken over all operations. Next on his list was Dominic Anzalone. Anzalone controlled all the gambling operations in western Pennsylvania, and while Lima knew him pretty well, they didn't really reconnect until Lima goes out west. Lima would explain that Anzalone came from Sicily in the late 1920s to murder John Bondi. Bondi had actually fled from Italy after whacking 3 made Sicilian mobsters and was hiding out in Pittsburgh. And when the Sicilian mob found out his location, they sent Anzalone there to handle business. Anzalone was actually a made guy in Sicily. And he arrives in Pittsburgh and he goes immediately looking for Bondi. The problem, and this will show you some politics, the problem was Bondi was related to Lima. They were actually cousins. And it was Lima's father who sat down with Anzalone and Bondi and squashed the beef. And Anzalone ended up staying in Pittsburgh and eventually would become a made member under Stefano Monacero. So Anzalone's wife would remain in Sicily. And he finds out through the grapevine that his wife is having an affair, and he immediately books travel back to Sicily to murder the men who allegedly were screwing his wife. When he arrives, she actually admits to the cheating and begs him to let it go. He does, and he returns to Pittsburgh. But the politics of all this, it makes him look bad. He didn't avenge his honor. It made him look sort of weak. I mean, at that point in the game, his honor was at stake, and he ends up damaging his reputation by not killing them. Montasero was so irate, he actually shelves Anzalone. And so Anzalone wasn't in good standing, according to Lima, until Joe Siragusa takes over as boss in 1929. So according to Lima, Anzalone moves out west in June of 1960, and he settles down in San Jose, California. He gets a no-show job through Salvatore Marino, who was once a Pittsburgh mob member but had transferred out west and now is a captain in the San Jose crime family. And simply stated, Anzalone needs a no-show job to fight extradition. But the friendship between Anzalone and Marino goes bad very, very quickly. Where are we at? Sorry. So whatever happened, Marino ends up fucking him over. And he stops paying him and he throws him out of the factory. And then he makes a call back to John LaRocca back in Pittsburgh, and he tells him Anzalone is talking shit about him. And LaRocca considered killing Anzalone after that, but let it go after a while. But LaRocca and Anzalone were never really close again. Anzalone accused Marino of lying to LaRocca. And when Joe Cerrito takes over as boss, he demotes Marino for lying. So according to Lima, it created a deep hatred between everybody involved. It was like a public slap in the face. According to Lima, it got much worse. When Anzalone goes out west, he left control of his operation to his partners, but all the money stopped coming west. Anzalone makes a call, and he was told that it now belonged to LaRocca. So you can see how, according to other people, according to Marino, Anzalone's talking subversive about LaRocca. LaRocca says, you know what, I'm just going to let it go. New boss comes in, demotes Marino because they believe he's lying, but LaRocca's not stupid. He knows Anzalone was probably running his fucking mouth. So what does he do? He just takes his fucking rackets. And I believe, according to the paperwork, they sent him 2 $30,000 bundles, and then he never got another dime. He never got another dime. So it was his way of saying, all right, fuck you. I'm going to just take your rackets then, you big mouth. So Anzalone is pissed, and he makes a call, and he was told that it now belonged to LaRocca. Anzalone then asks San Jose underboss Charlie Carbone to go to Pittsburgh and see LaRocca about the issue. And it didn't work because Carbone comes back and he explains to Anzalone, it's not yours no more. Give it up. Don't worry about it. So according to Lima, Anzalone wouldn't shut the fuck up, and 5 years later asks the new boss, Salvatore Taranto, to get involved again. And there are no other details really mentioned by Lima about this, so we don't know how it sort of ended. But there's so much here in all of these files, and I got to be honest, I can't go through everything. But he begins to dime out the San Jose crime family and gives the feds the hierarchy, the background, and the crimes. The details he gives to all of the beefs taking place in San Francisco truly shows how nobody seemed to be able to get along, and everybody owed favors either back to the Midwest or to the East. According to Lima, San Francisco crime family capo Vincenzo Infusino had wanted to set up an illegal operation in San Francisco with the help of associates from St. Louis. But Jimmy Lanza puts an end to those plans. Lima adds that Infusino had been made a capo by former boss Michael Abadi years earlier. Lima goes on to say his title was only honorary because Infusino never had any soldiers reporting to him. All the members reported to the underboss Gaspare Sciortino. According to Lima, Abadi made Infusino a capo because he was wealthy, and the idea was he might be able to use his influence to help the crime family. So we see here that remember when I tell you on this show all the time, money makes the wheels work. You make a ton of money, you're very important. But the minute that money goes away, so it's like saying, all right, the guy's bringing in $20K, $30K, $40K and north a month. Let's make him a captain. And that's what crime families have done. So Lima reveals that reveals information about an assortment of Cosa Nostra members in the Bay Area. He tells federal agents to get that Gaspare Sciortino had recently received a letter from an old associate named Sebastian Nani. Sciortino, Nani was a former member of the Colombo crime family who transferred to the San Francisco crime family after he moved to California. Nani was a suspect with Lima in the murder of Chicago mobster Nick DeJohn years earlier. However, there's really no evidence that Lima admitted to the murder specifically, but he gave the names. He was deported to Sicily back in the 50s after a narcotics conviction. According to Sciortino, Nani was living in Palermo and operating a taxi cab. Lima gave federal agents information about the San Francisco crime family members going back decades. Nick DeJohn, just so we can get this cleared, was an outfit mobster who came to San Francisco after fleeing Chicago. He was a narcotics peddler, and he becomes partners with Anthony Lima and Michael Abadi in an olive oil business. DeJohn quickly fell out with his new friends, and he turns up dead in the trunk of a car in 1947. Lima and Abadi were charged with that murder, although nobody was ever convicted of it. So, for example, Lima would tell them about Joe Piazza, former underboss of the San Francisco crime family in the 1930s. Piazza was part of a group of black handers who originally opposed the leadership of the boss Francesco Lanza. Lima said that Piazza was later murdered for attempting to extort the father of future San Francisco Mayor Joe Eliotto, who operated a fish company at the time. He also told them about Giuseppe Triforo, the father of a recently inducted member, Steve Triforo. Giuseppe Triforo was born in Sicily and became a mob member there. He moved to the United States and settled first in New York City, then in Cleveland. He served under Cleveland boss Dr. Romano. After Romano was killed, Frank Milano became his boss. Lima said that Giuseppe Triforo transferred his membership to San Francisco while he was running the crime family. Triforo worked as a security guard at the Fisherman's Wharf before he died in 1947. Cosa Nostra member Jimmy Luiso Fradiano was another mobster that Anthony Lima met with regularly after he relocated to the Bay Area in the late 1960s. Fradiano would later become, as we know, a massive notorious rat. But at the time, he was close to Lima, and he was probably the most active mob member in that area. Fradiano would tell Lima, and then Lima would tell federal agents that Fradiano was excited that Joe Eliotto had just been elected mayor of San Francisco in 1968. Eliotto, who was a prominent lawyer, came from a family with long-standing ties to the Italian community in San Francisco. Although he would later deny knowing any mobsters, Eliotto was an old friend of Lima and Fradiano. Eliotto had handled Lima's divorce from his first wife and had defended him years early in connection to the murder of Chicago mobster Nick DeJohn in 1947. So as you can see, he's given him like A to B and the whole entire fucking thing. Fradiano and Lima both thought that San Francisco crime family would benefit from Eliotto's election. Lima told federal agents that Eliotto would likely help mob members where he could, but he would avoid having to do favors that would come back to embarrass him. Lima would go on to tell federal agents that Jimmy Fradiano had already gotten a business loan from a bank connected to Joe Eliotto. Fradiano was anxious to get Eliotto to help him set up a gambling operation or a vending machine business. Lima would tell agents that he told Fradiano that he had to be patient because Eliotto hadn't even been sworn in as mayor yet. Fradiano had a low opinion of James Lanza, which created friction. Fradiano told Lima, and Lima would tell the feds that Lanza should be replaced as boss. Fradiano said that Lanza was too cautious and that he wouldn't take advantage of the supposed opportunities under Eliotto. Fradiano told Lima that Samuel and Gabriel Manamarino from the Pittsburgh crime family were secret part owners of the Stardust Hotel in Las Vegas. He said the brothers profited from an illegal scam orchestrated by old associate of theirs from Western Pennsylvania. Lima would continue to tell federal agents that the brothers were his close friend. Lima would tell federal agents that the brothers were his friends and that he had direct knowledge that they were mafia members under John LaRocca, and would give them information revolving around their crimes. Years earlier, before he began to cooperate, believe it or not, Lima denied to the FBI that he even knew him. So when they questioned him years earlier, before he becomes a rat, he doesn't know nothing. But now all of a sudden he knows everything. It just goes to show. Remember how I tell you that informants always change their story? So Bay Area gossip, Lima would tell people that Angelo Marino had attended the funeral of former Pittsburgh family member Samuel Manna Marino in New Kensington, Pennsylvania in 1967. Manna Marino had actually died of cancer. Marino was a Western Pennsylvania native, and his family knew Manna Marino well. Lima would tell federal agents about Vito Andragna, and he was originally from Western Pennsylvania as well. Adragna followed Dominic Anzalone out west to California in the early 60s. He was Anzalone's recruit. According to Lima, Dragna was obsessed about becoming an inducted member of the mob. He had two brothers who were mob members, and it bothered him that he wasn't. Adragna was tired of waiting and wanted Tony Lima or Anzalone to make him a member of the mob. Lima would go on to tell federal agents that it's possible Anzalone might make Adragna after some prodding. In 1976, Life magazine published a series of hard-hitting articles about Italian-American mob guys, okay? As a part of that investigation, the magazine identified every crime boss in the country, including Joe Cerrito in San Jose, Jimmy Lanza in San Francisco, and the fallout from those articles put Cerrito and Lanza under the public spotlight for the first time. Lima would tell agents that Cerrito was extremely paranoid that Life published a photograph of him with former Bonanno crime family underboss Frank Garofalo. Garofalo, as we know, is linked with heroin trafficking, and retired to Italy in the 1950s. Lima would tell them that Lanza was emotionally disturbed and that he was publicly identified as a mob boss. Joe Cerrito objected to being publicly identified as a mob boss and sued the magazine for libel. Lima would tell agents that Lanza supported Cerrito's lawsuit against the magazine. Anzalone offered Cerrito financial with his lawsuit. Many people inside and outside of organized crime were surprised that Cerrito decided to bring more attention to himself by suing the magazine. He could have just let the controversy blow over, but instead he didn't. But Cerrito was actually encouraged to do so by an influential underworld boss. Lima would go on to tell federal agents about a physical confrontation between Joe Cerrito and Dominic Ferrito. That rhymes, Ferrito and Cerrito. Apparently they got into a fist fight. Ferrito's sister was the mother of Cerrito. According to Lima, the two men had a simmering personal dispute over the upcoming marriage of Cerrito's son. Cerrito went to Ferrito's home to tell him that he was being removed from the crime family. Ferrito reacted by grabbing a knife and chasing him around the house, trying to kill him. Cerrito decided to take no action against Ferrito despite reports of the incident getting out. Ferrito remained a member in good standing. And that incident just highlights how far the San Francisco crime family had sunk by the 1960s, when the boss could be assaulted without any repercussions. So that the whole crime family's a fucking mess. According to Lima, Steve Magadino, the boss in upstate New York, Stefano Magadino, who is a leading member of the ruling Mafia Commission, actually ordered Cerrito to file a lawsuit as a test case. The hope of the lawsuit would be basically to force Time Life magazine to expose its sources, something that the magazine would actually never do, and yet they refused to retract the article. It was a pretty smart move because they wanted to find out who was giving up fucking information. Unlike the other named mob bosses, Cerrito was actually a successful businessman without a criminal record, and the commission figured it had a good chance of winning the lawsuit. Lima and other bosses would file lawsuits if Cerrito won. So he would go on to say that there hadn't been a formal commission meeting to decide the matter, but Stefano Magadino had contacted each commission member personally for their input. Cerrito would receive instructions from Magadino at a prearranged telephone, basically a prearranged payphone. The lawsuit itself angered a member of Cerrito's mob underlings because they were required to give sworn depositions. San Jose crime family underboss Emmanuel Figlia said that we are all ruined around here because of this fucking publicity. Figlia would go on to say that the lawsuit was bad for everybody's business. He said Cerrito should have resisted the commission's efforts to make him file that lawsuit. Salvatore Taranto countered that Cerrito had no choice because you just don't fight the commission unless you want to suffer the consequences. Cerrito would regret following Magadino's instructions. Cerrito would lose his car dealership after Lincoln Mercury decided to drop him following all of the bad publicity. It had been a source of pride of mob members in San Jose that their boss was connected to such a prestigious brand. Lima said it was a severe blow to the prestige of the San Jose crime family. Cerrito's lawsuit against the magazine eventually would be dismissed. So as you can see, they're really a fucking mess. Let's see. So on December 16th of 1968, Lima sits down with federal agents and they ask him about Russell Bufalino. The feds wanted to know the activities of Bufalino and his standing within the mafia. Without hesitation, Lina confirms that Russell Bufalino is the boss of his own family, sits on the commission, but he only knows him in name through Joe Cerrito and Jimmy Lanza, and that Bufalino attended the upstate meeting in New York known as Appalachian. He would also confirm that Angelo Bruno was the boss running Philadelphia. So Lima then would offer more information, saying that Carlos Marcello is the boss of his own family in Louisiana and is more powerful than anyone else in the country. Lima would explain that while he never met him, he understood that Marcello took care of his men, and if they got into a jam, he would make sure they were taken care of financially, and not many bosses still believed in that. And you can opine about the validity of what he just said. Yes, is Carlos Marcello, was he a man's man, and did he do the right thing? Absolutely. Was he a very powerful boss? Absolutely. But here's the question. He tells the feds, I've never met the guy, but I can tell you all of this bullshit. He was the boss at one time. Of course he knew him. I mean, if you're the boss you were a former boss of a crime family, how can you not know any of this shit? Lima would then say that he heard that Joe Bonanno was trying to settle up out west, and that Lima believed that if Bonanno dared, he would be killed as a result of trying to do so because he had been shelved. Lima then gives up Las Vegas, who owns which hotel, and who is responsible for sending money back to Kansas City. And he especially goes in deep against Anthony Savella, who was running all of the construction rackets in Vegas. His intel all but destroyed the mob in Pittsburgh and in Johnstown, and in his files. We only have 200 pages of that, and only 200 have been released. And the whole entire file itself is 3,000 pages. And all of these other pages are sealed. So until, the government releases more of that, we're never, ever going to know. And that's just sort of the validity and the stuff with Anthony Lima. Like I said, let me see if I can pull up one thing really quick, just to make reference to it. So here is I'm going to just read like one or two pages of this. So this is included in Anthony Lima's file. Now, keep in mind, he doesn't really start talking until 65, and he does that after he's been shelved and he's no longer anybody. He just starts giving everybody up. Specific revelations relating to Cosa Nostra have previously been brought to light by a former Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area native, which has established the existence of the organization in this vicinity without question. Appendix A, organizational background. PGT, when a member source, was initiated in Pittsburgh and advised that the Pittsburgh crime family of the mob was organized in 1905. Prior to that year, the organization was completely referred to as the Black Hand and was in control of members called the Camarista, who were mostly Italians from Calabria. And that's an area in southern Sicily located at the heel of the boot. He advised that the term Borgata or Burgata is the term used to identify a family or a criminal group. The aforementioned informant advised that he was present at a Pittsburgh initiation ceremony in 1927, at which time the captain of the Pittsburgh group was Steve Montasera. The Soto Capo was Landolina. He says that the term captain or capo is simply a term for boss or leader, and that the Soto Capo is the title given to the person who is his assistant in command of the Borgata. PGT2, another member source, was questioned specifically about his knowledge about the background of Cosa Nostra. He stated that he heard stories about Steve Montasera, who was the captain of the Pittsburgh crime family during the latter 20s, but recalled only that he had been gunned down as he was emerging from a Pittsburgh area hospital. When the informant was asked if he recalled anything about Peppino Siracusa, who succeeded Montasera as captain, he indicated that he recalled only that Siracusa had been killed in the bathroom of his home, which was located in the Squirrel Hill section of Pittsburgh. He advised further that the tenures of the aforementioned individuals were before my time. So let me go to this. PGT-3 has advised that when he was a youngster in Wilderming, PA, he heard about the massacre of the Volpe brothers in Pittsburgh about 1933. Several days after the community learned about this incident, he saw an individual named Tilio Pecora shot to death on a street in Wilderming, but could not identify the two gunmen involved. He could not say that the killing of Pecora was related to the Volpe affair, but he remembers that the adult Italians living in that area were convinced that there was a connection. He said that he knew a man who saw Louis Volpe kill an individual during the early 1930s. This man, who was a youngster, was playing in the woods on what was known as the Trolleones Farm, located in the Monroeville section of Pittsburgh. This family operates business in the Wilkinsburg area of Pittsburgh. The youngster observed Louis Volpe shoot a man in the head and bury him. Since then, this man has lived in fear that Volpe might find out who he was. PGT-3 was asked when he became a member of Cosa Nostra. He declined to say when it actually occurred, but stated that he went through the routine of the mixture of blood and the burning of a saint's picture in his hands. He recalled that he chose St. Jude and that this saint had been chosen by many members before. PG-T3, a member and an informant, advised that he considers the True Mob as an excellent organization. He stated that it was based on honor, wants nothing to do with white slavery or narcotics, and that is an organization dedicated to taking care of its own members. He feels, however, that because membership in the organization has not been limited to people of Sicilian origin, some of its honorable purposes may have fallen by the wayside. He indicates that there are too many non-Sicilians in the organization. Let's see. That's 2. Let me drop to 3 really quick. All right. So, it just shows the old world beliefs. And we've talked about this before on this show specifically. Just how certain Sicilian guys didn't want Calabrians and Neapolitans around. So we go to PG 92-599. On May 17th of 68, PGT-3 advised that Mike Genovese, who suffered a massive heart attack on May 13th of 68, was immediately taken to Shadyside Hospital in Pittsburgh, where he was expected to remain in the hospital for a minimum of 1 month. He was not at home when the attack came, and according to his wife, persuaded associates at the Phoenix Motel to handle the hospital arrangements. Visitors were not allowed to see him at the hospital. Despite the fact that the attack occurred on May 13th, Mike Genovese was still experiencing intensive pain as late as May 17th. and was instructed by heart specialists attending to him to alert them whenever his pain became too great so that the appropriate electrocardiograms could be taken. The aforementioned informant advised that Genovese was originally confined to the intensive care unit at Shadyside Hospital, but was transferred to a private room on May 21st of 68. His older brother Felix was in the hospital with him almost constantly and handled all of his mail. Telephone calls and special visitors were handled, especially members Sebastian, John LaRocca. During his confinement, Mrs. Genovese left the house daily at 3 o'clock to visit and usually stayed till about 9. Genovese mentioned to the informant on the day before his heart attack that the FBI was again very interested in his daily activities. He was not known by the informant at the time of this contact whether physical well-being of Genovese would have any effect on the hierarchy of the Pittsburgh mob, etc. June 30th of 68, PGT-3 advised as follows. Despite the orders from his personal doctor, Mike Genovese will begin to work again on July 1st of 68 at the Phoenix Motel in Monroeville. Although his schedule has been completely erratic in the past, he will adhere to a strict 12 noon to 7 p.m. schedule and will probably restrict his movement. He lost a great deal of weight since the heart attack on May 13th and now weighs approximately 155 to 160 pounds. Those friends who were not allowed to visit him at the Shadyside Hospital in Pittsburgh while he was confined to the ICU have been visiting him at his home, Road 2, Box 149-B, Gibsonia, Pennsylvania. And the big days for visitations have been Sundays. So as you see, Lima's giving him everything, right? Here's the last one. And this is the second index of PG 92599. The Pennsylvania State Police representative requested that the FBI in Pittsburgh obtain fingerprints from suspects Paul Scolari and Anthony Capizzi to conduct an investigation in the state of New Jersey in relation to a background of Capizzi. The Pittsburgh Police Department decided to initiate a program designed to give a message to the mob in Pittsburgh. The program consisted of harassment by stationing ununiformed police officers in and near all known gambling and after-hours establishments controlled by members of the mob and their associates in the East Liberty section of Pittsburgh. This technique began on December 18th of 67 and continued until January 1st of 68. The Pittsburgh PD also furnished homicide detectives to cover Pittsburgh leads in the murder investigation. PGT-3 furnished the following information on January 5th of 68. Anthony Lima, informant, was well acquainted with Alphonse Morano, who was killed in gangland fashion on December 13th of 67 on the outskirts of Pittsburgh. He knew Morano was a gambler and an aspiring pimp who enjoyed driving expensive cars but never had any money. He was definitely being used by representatives of the Mafia in Pittsburgh area. But Lima never had any information to indicate that Morano was actually a member of the mob. He was probably smarter than he looked or acted, but the mob would not have trusted him as much as he was trusted. He was fairly well versed on various gambling techniques and knew how the numbers book is supposed to operate. He had recently allied himself with some young girls who were prostituting themselves in the East Liberty Club area and receiving a percentage of their earnings, according to the sources the informant has. So as you can see, Lima just up and down the board, just kind of gives up everything. And this is a lot of the reasons why I think Pittsburgh has faltered. I got to be honest with you. I think this is a lot of the reason why Pittsburgh had a short run is because people like Lima were giving up information on everybody. And that's just kind of the way the cookie crumbles. So that's going to be it for the Rat Files this week. Next week, we got more Rat Files coming, and it's just going to get worse. Just the information they give up is just absolutely fucking just insane to me. So we're going to take a break. When we come back, we are going to get into the Philadelphia mob wars.